Hello, Atima. Welcome to Narratives of Connection. Thank you very much for your time to join us today. How are you
Thank you.
doing?
Very well. Thank you so much, Dr. Leroy. It's such a pleasure being here. Uh, I'm actually doing quite well. I've just come back from a retreat, from a principal's retreat, which I thought was going to be more strategic, but happily, it has been rejuvenating. So I'm actually doing quite well. How about you?
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that there was some rejuvenation there in what was thought was a work. I could probably say the same about my recent trip to Ireland, which was both business kind of related, but also a bit rejuvenating as well, and seeing family. So yes, I suppose we're equally rejuvenated in what we've been doing recently. So just for the audience, I mean, I think they'll see a little bit of the bio that we've had to edit because it's so many different areas that you cover. But how would you explain to people what you do at the moment?
That is such an interesting question. So I would like to talk about my identity as a mother and a daughter. I think that is a big part of who I am. And I think a lot of where I am currently stems from that desire to be a better mother, to be a better daughter. Um, Work-wise, I am a senior principal and a passionate educator. And although I say it myself, but I do think that that passion really spurs me to try and see what exactly is needed other than the basic curriculum. Um, in my journey as an educator, I realized very early on that it's not just the curriculum that matters, or it's not the teacher efficacy, but it's that sense of social emotional wellness that affects learning. And that is what I'm working on with my school, with other educators, with other organizations like the Contentment Foundation. And that is where I am at the moment, trying to see what is the social emotional aspect that actually helps our children learn and become better citizens on the whole.
It sounds like an invaluable piece of work that someone's looking to do in our society. So, I mean, you're in Malaysia at the moment,
In
and
Singapore,
you meant, sorry, Singapore. So,
that's right.
you mentioned that obviously being a mother and being a daughter is important. So, were your family from Singapore originally, or did you move to Singapore?
So I was born and brought up in India, and I came from a very cultural and a socio-political family. So my grandfather was into politics, and he was a leader in his own right, and he absolutely enjoyed flaunting rules and anything that did not work, any social norm that was not doing any service or doing a disservice. He would choose to go and change that or challenge that. So I grew up in India, and my family was also very steeped in cultural practices and traditions to keep them alive, the songs and the dances and the cuisines. And that formed my basic childhood. I moved to Singapore when I was 31, along with my husband and my daughter. And this is where I became an educator. This is really exciting because this is where it took me. And I had all those cultural and those traditional values steeped into me. And I came into an education philosophy which was very different to what I was used to. So there was a whole
Mm.
lot of paradigm shift that happened here in Singapore, and just to get the best of both kind of pedagogies and diversity, um, it helped me become who I am today. So that has been my journey, and I'm happily in Singapore still, whilst my daughter has moved to Australia. So I'm actually, my
Mm.
family is now back in India. I'm in Singapore. My daughter's in Australia, but it still feels very connected.
This world we live in at the moment just allows us to be a little bit more connected, doesn't it? Um,
Yes.
you said you moved when you were 31. So did you have an inkling about being in the educational area when you were in India? Was that something you found a passion for at that
My
time?
mother tells me that as a child, I used to collect all the neighborhood kids and used to start teaching them. So I guess that was that was something that I was interested in. Um,
How
but
old
I
were you
went.
then?
I think I was 6.
Right.
So right from the age of 6, I started doing that, and I create a different kind of
The other kids.
teaching the other kids.
Just after
That
that
is
bit.
okay. Yes, of course. So, as I said, I really enjoyed teaching and learning as well. So I enjoyed learning and then synthesizing that information and then passing it on, because I felt that that was one of the best things that I could do in order to consolidate my own learning. I don't think I was that articulate about it. And I often remember my parents actually telling me to stop teaching everyone and focus on my own studies. But
Mm.
I realized that that was a way in which I consolidated my own practices and my own understanding. When I came to Singapore, I realized that there wasn't any, uh, outlet for me in terms of journalism, which was something that I was into whilst in India, and I wanted to get back into some kind of a profession where I could get that sense of fulfillment.
Yeah.
So teaching was something that came naturally to me, but I wasn't qualified at that time. The only good thing was that because I was bilingual and multilingual, a job opened up at my school, which said that someone who's fluent in Hindi, they would like to come and teach, and I was very happy in going and applying, and I was literally in my walking gear when I went in and took the interview, and lo and behold, I was a Hindi teacher. But it was when
Mm.
I started teaching that I realized that there's a whole lot more to teaching than curriculum and so on. And that's when I did my formal degree and my formal master's, and that is where I started in the field of teaching. And then I started delving deep. Part of my entire master's was talking about how diversity affects teaching and learning. And
Hmm.
I think that really gave me a lot of insight into how people teach and how children learn. And there onwards, it's, as they say, the rest is history.
It's grown from there. And when you moved from India to Singapore and the different kind of cultural uh, issues you faced, I mean, how did you deal with that, or how did that affect your life, but also your professional sort of development? I mean, it sounds like that was already something in the masters that you kind of highlighted. But how was that time moving across to a different culture and a mixture of cultures as well?
So I was actually quite. The interesting part was that my husband was a sailor. So when we got married, I actually traveled on ships with him, and that
Mm.
helped me really expand the worldview. What I had in India was really limited, but when I traveled more outside, I realized that cultures are so different, so vastly different. The cuisines, the norms of what is right, what is wrong, belief systems. Uh, and I was really grateful and glad to have my daughter as part of that experience. So till the
Mm.
age of about 4 and a half, my daughter sailed along with me. So we did understand that cultures are different, people are different. But when we moved lock, stock, and barrel to Singapore, we realized that looking at cultures from outside, as opposed to being in a culture, is quite different.
Mm.
And it was only when my daughter one day very happily said, "Okay, we've spent 3 months here. How about going for our next contract?" We realized that for her, that was the norm.
Mm.
Sailing in ships and going to new places was the norm. That is what her life was. And
Mm.
just the idea of staying stagnant at one place was not something she had known before. And that was my aha moment, that we take children for granted and we
Yeah.
assume that they will just flow with us.
Yeah.
So coming to Singapore was a big change for her, and it was for me.
How did your daughter deal with that news that there wasn't going to be another contract and you'd be staying in Singapore? And how did she take that?
She was actually quite shocked, and we were very surprised at her response,
Mm.
because for her it was a life changing, a life altering situation. She could
Mm.
not come to terms with it for a couple of days, and she almost started getting a stammer for a little while. So we realized as parents that we had to take a step back and give her that assurance of stability,
Mm.
and that was really important for us. But children are very resilient. We don't give them enough credit, I think.
Mm.
They're very resilient, and once she assimilated that news. She settled pretty quickly after that.
Mm.
But yes, there was a lot of change for her as well in terms of cuisine, in terms of the language, in terms of the overall culture. So she started talking in what we fondly call Singlish, and
Right.
Singlish is a, I would say it should be categorized as a formal language because it has its
Right.
own nuances. Um, but that was a part of growing up, and that was a part that I had to learn as well, to
Mm.
say that yes, she should adopt Singlish, and she should adopt because she had to adjust socially, culturally, with
Mm.
friends in the playground, with schoolmates. She had to start eating. In India, we always have our lentils and rice and then vegetables, and we have a different thing. And here, there was a lot of meats and different kind of vegetables, and it was really interesting to watch her assimilate. And I think I became more adaptable through her, watching her. And I am actually quite grateful to her for teaching me how to be more internationally minded.
So, in terms of that movement, most immigrant populations, when they move to a new country, have a connection to a network of their own people in that country. So, was that the same for you when you moved to Singapore? Was there a big Indian community there at the time?
Actually, no, there wasn't. In 2001, the immigration policies were very different. So there wasn't
Right.
a huge Indian populace here. So, which was in a way good because it forced us to, assimilate better. It forced us to look into cultures and friendships, and how could we expand our own social circle here. Uh, So, yes, but at the same time, I think it also forced us to look out of regional boundaries. So, within India, as you know, there are many states, and there are very strict regional boundaries in terms of linguistics or in terms of cuisines or cultures. And it was really interesting for us to see that those boundaries were dissolved naturally when we came to Singapore.
Right.
Just the idea of meeting someone from India would instantly feel a sense of connection. And
Mm.
I remember Nitima, my daughter, she used to actually go to anyone and say, "Okay, are you from India? Do you speak Hindi?" And sometimes people would say, "No, we don't." And it was then she also developed that understanding that not everyone would speak the same language, even within a country or a culture. So
Mm.
it expanded our
Mm.
horizons in many different ways, and I think we couldn't be more grateful for the experience.
And the kind of culture that you had in India, and the rituals, and like you said, the cuisine. Um, so it sounds like you didn't really hang on to that. You kind of expanded with obviously the culture in Singapore, but also when you met other people from India, there was more of understanding their cultural experience from India as well. So because most people sort of talk about hanging on to a culture in a new country, so it doesn't sound like that was the issue for you
So I think
in the
for
same
me,
way.
what happened was, yeah. So for myself and for our family, what happened was that we kind of zoomed out, and we looked at the big picture before
Yeah.
we zoomed in again. So in the last couple of years, what happened was that we honed back because we wanted to give our daughter those cultural roots. So we managed to collect people with similar backgrounds and identities, and start a cultural community here as well. The idea was simply to connect, to deepen the roots, and to preserve the traditions and the heritage, because I do think that that is another big thing that we're losing. If we're
Mm.
losing a language, or if we're losing the traditions or the cultural nuances, we're losing a big part of our identities. So for us,
Mm.
that became something that we started again. So in Singapore itself, we have an Uttarakhand community, an Uttarakhand association, and I started working a lot for that. And it actually started when there was a big, what we call the Himalayan tsunami that came a few years ago. And we wanted to do
Right.
something for the people there. And we tried and reached out to different people with a similar background. And when we all came together, we realized that there was such a power in community and we could do so much
Mm.
good. And that's when we started coming together, rebuilding that sense of connection, cultural heritage, and also supporting people back in the hills, or even people here, because we are a lot of us children are third culture kids now, and
Mm.
there's so much that they need in terms of support, and we felt that we needed to do something for our children, for our families, for our communities here as well as back in India. And then funnily enough, we realized that there were communities and cultural groups all around the world. So there was one in Australia, there was one in the US, and we connected with them. So the world actually became smaller as we tried to deepen our roots, and tried to
Yeah.
make a positive community that could reach out in times of need. So that's
Mm.
that's that's where we were with that experience.
And the work that you've done to teach the younger generation about those roots, how's that developing since you've been doing that? Do you think that that's been uh, a great interest in that, or is it sort of a struggle to get them to look back into their roots and reconnect?
That struggle is very real because when the world is connected, um, there is a bit of a danger of it being so unified as well, that you forget that diversity, and it is so easy to overlook that diversity and the richness that it brings to us. So
Mm.
our initial effort towards bringing the community together was just through projects, of helping someone or helping people in need, and that kind of connected. But when we talked about the cultural nuances, or the food, still kind of brought in a little bit of interest, but the
Mm.
language was very difficult to adhere to. And it was so easy for our children here to speak in English, Singlish, uh, but Hindi, as well as the actual languages of Kumaoni and Garhwali and Jaunsari, they were very difficult. Uh, Most of even my generation does not speak that language. They understand it, but they will not speak
Mm.
it. Let aside the written part of it. So
Yeah.
that is still a struggle. But at the same time, what we are seeing is, as we connect with people, we try and talk about our the cultural roots. There is starting to, there's this budding interest in it. So gradually, we started our community event, and we decided to register it in Singapore so that it becomes a bit more official, a bit more
Yeah.
formal. And we started with a good 25 people, but now we have grown to about 500 to 600 people, which is
Wow.
in 5 years. And beauty of that is that we are starting to bring in artists from the region. We are starting to bring in the local communities, Red Cross, for example, to come and work with the youngsters, and to see that they have their roots, but B, they also have their wings. So they
Mm.
have that power to make a change, and the power of a community. So it's really nice that this year we're going to celebrate. We have an kind of a biannual event, and this year we
Yeah.
see a lot more youngsters coming over to take reins of it. So that is really, really comforting in a way.
Well, that's exciting, isn't it? That the work will continue because there's so many people now recognizing the benefits of their diversity that they can bring to a modern culture that Singapore is.
Definitely,
Um,
definitely.
and you've got family still in India, you mentioned?
Oh yes, absolutely. I have a big extended family in India, so we go back every year, twice
Yeah.
or thrice a year if possible. But I think it's important for me as well to stay connected to the roots. And also, I do feel that sense of belonging and that sense of purpose as well. So we are
Yeah.
looking at supporting some schools and some cultural communities that are on the brink of, um, I wouldn't say extinction really, but at the same time, they need a lot of support in order to thrive. So
Mm.
we're working with those communities at the moment, and we hope that there will come a time when these communities become self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're making a difference to the Singapore community that you're living in, and you're also making a difference to the Indian community that you've come from. Um, there's also in your work, by the sounds of it, again another um, important teaching of culture and diversity that comes through in the curriculum. So you said that certain curricula teach people a certain um, piece of information or pieces of information that they need to know, but there's also the hidden curriculum, or the elements that they really are not taught, and how do we do that? So some of that obviously must be outside of your main job, which is sounding what you're doing with these other projects. But how do you incorporate it within the working role as a principal?
So I think one of the challenges that, firstly, to give you a context, I teach in an international school in Singapore. So we are a big international group. Um, and this particular international group has different kinds of schools in it. And where I am is an affordable international school. So in Singapore, local Singaporeans are not allowed to go to international schools. We have to take special permission from the ministry in order for them to attend any international school. So
Right.
the students who come to my school are all expatriates. And that means that they're all students who are coming in from different backgrounds, very, very culturally diverse, pedagogically diverse backgrounds as
Mm,
well. And trying to bring them all together and teach, and then, for them to move together as a cohort can be quite challenging, especially because
mm,
um, thanks to the economy, the way COVID disrupted our lives and generally economies at large. What we realize is that the average student will stay for about 2.5 to 3 years in our schools. Um, and that means that we just have that very short window
mm.
of trying to bring them together and then moving them up with the values that we have identified as a school. So a lot of it is not necessarily the curriculum because they'll possibly move in 2 years or 3 years, and they will go on to a new curriculum. So what you need to do at that point is you need to be able to give them a transferable understanding and knowledge and skills that they can actually utilize and move to another country or school or
Yeah.
culture. So for us, it is a reality that you can't purely teach the content of the curriculum. It has to be
Mm.
a whole lot of skills in terms of the social emotional awareness, in terms of how to learn rather than what to learn. So for us, that is a big part of our work that we are doing.
And seeing people at different levels when they enter the school as well, like you said, the different curricula that they've come from,
Yeah.
different backgrounds, that must be quite challenging to sort of get the right level and to keep everyone along. I mean, how do you deal with those students that are maybe struggling a little bit? I mean, is there an individualized approach for them that is inherent in how the school operates?
And I think, well, thank you for asking that question because that is essentially the nature of our jobs. Because curricula all over the world, if you just look at pure English or maths or science, more or less those levels will be equal. But it's not that we are looking at. We are looking at how do you assimilate a child who's coming in from a different culture into a brand new culture, and trying
Mm,
to make a space, make a sense of identity, make a worldview for even in those initial 6 months. And that is where that very essential part of social emotional learning is what we need to identify and we need to support the child with. Not only the child, it's important that we support our families with it, because what
mm,
we see is that parents bring along with them a whole lot of um, not only the expectations and cultural understandings or misunderstandings, but also possibly what do you call about generational trauma.
yeah.
And it is just directly given to the child. And for us as educators, it is important for us to be aware of it firstly before we do anything about it, and then see how best to actually work in that short span and provide them those short skills of how do you socially navigate the playground, for example, or how do
Mm,
you understand a teacher who's physically different, who's linguistically different. Sometimes we have children coming in from non-English speaking backgrounds, and imagine in
mm,
a classroom where they are sitting there for the whole day without understanding a word of what's happening. That's
yeah.
traumatic. So for us, the work is the readiness of these children and providing them those transferable skills and conceptual understanding that they can take from school to school or wherever they go.
Yeah. And I noticed in your bio that you've done a TED talk in the past. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about the TED Talk and what you were passionate in that idea that you were conveying?
Yes. For me, life is one whole thing. It can't be compartmentalized. Yes, you do compartmentalize the information or the kind of work you do in one compartment, but for me, it is important for everyone to understand that one action has a massive, whether you call it a butterfly effect or ripple effect. Um,
Mm,
so I realized that in the school, our students come from more affluent backgrounds. They're expatriates, and a lot of them come in with a lot of privileges in terms of even things like basic stationery that you're using. So what happened was at the end of every term, I realized that students are discarding the old stationery and buying new fancy stationery kits. I one day decided, just as an experiment, to see how much stationery was being discarded. And I just looked at color pencils. I didn't even look at the rest of it. And it was
mm,
about 8 to 12 kilos, which is massive. Can you
wow.
imagine so much stationery just going to the landfills? And they happily threw that away. Um,
Mm,
I come from India, where we are not only taught right from the beginning not to waste things, but also I have seen abject poverty around me,
yeah,
and
yeah.
just looking at that wastage, it really tugged at my conscience as well. And
Yeah.
I actually started collecting those pencils and taking them back for communities who could not afford it. And these are good quality pencils and stationery that we're talking about. And when
Mm,
some other students heard of my work, these were National University of Singapore students. They said, "Oh, we are going to such and such country. Can we take some of that stationery?" And I said, "Yes, why not?" And so they took some of it to different parts of Southeast Asia, Africa, and so on. And the work kind of spread. And so we called it traveling pencils, because
right.
it was just a whole lot of pencils, and then suddenly we had erasers and scissors and sharpeners coming to us, and markers. Um, and so my job was very simple, just to take and collect whatever was not being used, and then send it over. But later on, and this was after my TED talk, there came a point where I realized that students were very happy, and they actually got a sense of achievement by discarding their stationery. And I felt that that was also not a good idea. So we talked
Mm,
to them about, if you think this stationery is actually good enough for someone else to use, why cannot you use it? And can you actually give up your new stationery? And that challenged a lot of students, but more than students, it challenged a lot of parents. And
yes. Yes.
a lot of parents came to me, and thankfully, respectfully, but they did say that, we feel that our children should be using new stationery and giving up their old. And when I was trying to talk to them about, if they think this is altruism, then they can definitely use their own pencils right to the very end. And
Mm,
I think it generated a lot of debate and introspection in our community. But I still remember there was this beautiful group of Japanese moms who came up to me and said, "Actually, we can help in this." And I said, "Okay." And they actually took popsicle sticks, and they extended, because part of the concern was that children need their grip, their pencil
yeah.
grip. So they extended the short pencils, and they said they can reuse, or they can use the pencil to the fullest. So it's just
Yeah.
creating that sense of awareness. Of course, during COVID, of course, then we couldn't do this due to the hygiene issues. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, this is one of the things that I still advocate, that if you think that there's something which can be given, donated, then perhaps it can be used by you to the very end.
Mm. And how did the organization take to the kind of changes that you were instigating or recognizing and sort of instigating, shall we say?
Yeah, I'm very grateful to my organization, and that is one of the reasons I've stuck to them for a long, long time. This is my 20th year with
Yeah.
my current organization,
Wow.
because um, I think they recognize my need for that agency and autonomy, and they gave it to me, and I think they celebrate it with me. And my boss himself is into mindfulness, and he's quite passionate about social emotional learning. And
Mm.
I think for me that is big, because if your leaders are well, and if your leaders are aware, and if your leaders are open to change, then you know that organization will flourish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have mentioned as well about in your bio, you mentioned about yoga and meditation. So you mentioned that with the leaders. So do you think that there's a movement now where more leaders are obviously taking this approach? It seems to me that that's kind of the movement at the moment. People are recognizing, especially with COVID, the way to potentially have some downtime, have some reflection, and then come back stronger as leaders with what they have to face. Do you see that as well in Singapore?
Um, yes, but I do think it's not sufficient, or it's more cosmetic in nature at the moment.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that there is a start, because any kind of mindfulness, or any kind of practice that allows you, and gives you that time to pause and to introspect and self-reflect, needs to be a practice. It can't be a one-off thing. And
Mm.
unfortunately, more often than not, it becomes a one-off thing, or a one-off retreat, or a one-off workshop. But it needs to be cultivated and explicitly woven into the organization. It can't be, um, an ad hoc, or something that just happens by chance or spontaneously. It has to be actually a part of your strategic planning.
Mm.
And this was something that I realized when we were creating our school as well. And we decided to put happiness and well being as part of the mission and vision, because if you don't, you leave it to chance. And we can't afford to do it.
Yeah.
So for me, it is important that leaders do take care of themselves, because organizational wellness, and hence the success, comes from a leader who's well himself or herself. Otherwise,
Mm.
you end up talking about short-term success. But I think even that notion of success needs to be redefined for individuals and for organizations.
And it sounds like your boss obviously had an interest in this anyway. So was that always the case? Was it he always the boss over the 20 years you've been there, or has it been someone else? And then that's been much more difficult to instigate those kind of changes into what is, like you say, a very short period of time, because you want to make sure that you are maintaining that happiness and well-being whilst those children are with you for a very short period of time, given all the other issues we talked about that are difficult for them. So has the leader always been of that mindset, or has it been challenging in other times? There's maybe a bit of a
Yeah.
political question to ask from
No,
your
no, no.
organization.
I feel trusted and respected enough to actually talk about this. I think
Yeah.
every organization, like an individual, kind of goes through Maslow's hierarchy. I often believe
Yeah.
that organizations themselves grow, and there's a point where you need that basic need to be met in an organization before you actually come to that kind of self-actualization mode. And organizations
Mm.
grow, and as long as their growth um, is happening in all areas, I think you will see that there are people who are retained, who the employee retention is higher. um, my boss, actually, it was my boss's mother, who was my boss at one point, and she was the one who I worked with in the organization. And I think from her side, I was really, really grateful, because again, she gave me a lot of autonomy, respect, and also she had that sense of entrepreneurship. Okay, try this idea. For
Mm.
me, that was something that was really important. As I said, the sense of agency was very important for me, and she gave it to me. And she also gave me the opportunity to try and also fail. So for
Yeah.
that, I'm very grateful. So when her son took over the reins, I had actually worked with him,
Yeah.
as an absolute youngster, and now
Yeah.
I'm seeing him evolve. I'm seeing him deepen his practices, and he is a mindfulness practitioner as well. And
Yeah.
he was also instrumental in connecting me to many organizations and many people who were into this practice, and who were delving deeper. So, for example, the Contentment Foundation, which is a foundation based in the US, but at the same time, they're doing a lot of work with mindfulness and social emotional learning across all over the world with schools. So,
Mm.
when I started working with them, my boss and I, we were wondering, okay, what do we do in terms of social emotional learning? Because you needed to be explicit, you needed to be a part of the curriculum, and not all
Yeah.
teachers had the expertise to write that curriculum. So we needed an expert to, write that curriculum. And I actually ran a survey, not a survey really, a kind of a research in my school to see how does mindfulness impact learning. And
Mm.
this was the grade five. So we invited a neutral body, to conduct a research without bias and prejudice. And we realized that within about 8 weeks of intervention, students had actually experienced a sense of wellness, and we also realized that the behavior issues were less frequent. So
Mm.
we knew it worked, but then we needed someone to write the curriculum for us, and that's where the Contentment Foundation came in. And we became
Right.
their what we call the mothership school, or their flagship school. And since then, we've had this beautiful, rich partnership where we talk to them about what is working, what is not working. And now this is the first year that our students have made their own what they call the contentment buddies, and they're coming
Mm.
together to try and take the reins of the curriculum themselves. Um, it is work in progress. I'm not saying it's there, but
Yeah.
again, the stem from the leadership, and it trickled down, and now it's come to our students, and there will be hopefully some point in time where it extends to the parents and then extended community. So the important point about leadership, understanding that importance, is that is paramount. Your leaders have to be well in order to bring wellness to the organization and to the community at
Mm.
large.
And did you get many parents who are coming back and saying, "What have you done? This my child is completely different now."
We've had a lot of interesting conversations. It started by
Right.
saying that why are you wasting our children's time?
Yeah.
Because when you leave the English, the maths, the science for a while, and then you invest in mindful breathing, or how do you identify your emotions? Parents are worried about grades and scores. Uh,
Yeah.
so that is where the research helped, because we showed the research and we talked about how children actually benefit with this, and not only children, families benefit here. So it took us some time, but it happened quite quickly, and I think COVID actually accelerated that, because the need for wellness was very quickly identified during COVID. And we ran this curriculum also during COVID. So it showed us that parents identified that yes, there
Mm.
was a need. So that was good. We do have some very interesting anecdotal evidence where children, you can see them using mindfulness techniques within the playground to resolve their own conflicts. Or we've had parents coming and telling us how they lost their temper, and the child actually stopped them and said, perhaps you want to identify what emotion you're feeling. So we've
Yes.
had some hilarious conversations with the parents as well, but our parents are
Yeah.
starting to see the semantics change as well, because when
Yeah.
the practice starts to get consolidated, the semantics change, and when your semantics change, your behavior changes.
Yeah.
So that is a very, very positive thing. But yes, of course, we're still trying to identify what are the best ways to continue this conversation, or to continue this learning as our children
Yeah.
move to different places, or our families move to different communities. So
Yeah.
we're still working with that.
And then you have mentioned that the school does have more affluent kind of population in terms of the family background. So, how easy do you think it would be to translate that to less affluent schools in Singapore? Do you think that
Yeah.
is that already
Um,
happening or not?
so yes, definitely. So the Contentment Foundation spans across the world, and we are looking at, in fact, I was talking to a group of principals in Africa, and it was really interesting to hear their challenges, because I felt very privileged when I was talking to them about my school problems. In fact, just after a little bit of time, I realized that I don't have any school problems as compared to theirs.
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
so excited about this whole curriculum, because they felt that their families, their communities are in so much need of this curriculum. So what we are doing at the moment within the foundation is trying to identify people who can sponsor these schools, or people who are happy to work with these schools, and either volunteer their time or volunteer their skills, and at the same time spread this, because this is a need. This is
Yeah.
no longer a luxury or privilege. This is a need for any school anywhere around the world.
Mm.
So to answer your question, can the schools access it regardless of where they are and how they are? My answer is yes, definitely.
Mm.
What we are looking for is people to take that ownership and that sense of understanding that this is important, this is necessary, this actually comes in before anything else, even before the
Yeah.
regular curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess this brings us to um, one of the people that has kind of led me to have a chat with you today. So first of all, I should disclose that Neetami, your daughter, is one of the doctors in the organisation I work in. An excellent doctor, not only academically but holistically as well, I should say.
Thank you.
But also the learnings from Gabor Mate's new book and his work in the past have been something, she and I have discussed, and then it came to realization that you've been talking to her about Gabor Mate for many years. So that kind of fits in with the work that you're saying. I mean, it's kind of all that work that he's put together for how we nurture children and how we look at the traumas that people have gone through childhood, because no one has a book about how to be a best parent. That we all do it as the best we can from generational learnings and rituals and different cultures, and moving from one country to another is another element of needing to be mindful of that. So how did you first discover Gabor Mate, and how long have you been trying to indoctrinate your daughter with his teachings?
um, so I'll go a little further beyond before I discovered Dr. Gabor Mate. When I was 27, I went through a major health crisis. I lost a lot of weight, and the initial assumption was that it was because I was breastfeeding, and but it just went on till I reached a weight of 26 kilos, and I
Wow.
could actually my one of the doctors, a very playful doctor, he and I had almost become friends, and he said, I can actually count all your bones because you've lost total fat.
Right.
But it was 26 kilos, and I fractured my bone, and I couldn't put a cast because the cast was too heavy and it would fracture my bone further. So
Right.
it was that bad. And we tried everything, and I tried allopathy, homeopathy, you name it, and I tried it, Tibetan medicine, Ayurvedic,
Mm.
anything, prayers, hypnotherapy. Um, till one day, one doctor came from the US, and he said, "Look, I know it's said that Asians don't get gluten allergy, but actually you do seem to have it." And in fact, I was the first person to be diagnosed with gluten allergy in that part of India, and so much so
Wow.
that the hospital dietitian used to send the next few patients to me to say, "I'm not sure what to give them to eat. Can you please tell them?" So, um, but what happened was that it kicked my interest in wellness, and anything and everything that was to do with wellness. There were 2 years in which I kind of read everything, looked at different ways of healing, and that became an interest. When we moved to Singapore, that interest kind of took a little bit of a pause while I was, getting into the education field. But it resurfaced later on, and I needed to get into that. I felt the need to get back into that wellness part. That's when
Mm.
I started attending different workshops and reading books, and trying to understand what is healing, what is wellness, what does wellness within mean. Uh, and then fast forward, that's when I came across the works of Dr. Gabor Mate, and it was also with the Contentment Foundation. And we have a community that is, very, very active, where we look at the new research in the field of wellness, and we share it with each other. So when I was looking into that work, I felt that this was so significant, and this was something that not many people were talking about. But at the same time, I made a lot of connections with uh, a lot of cultural practices back from my own experience from India, but also in my travels. So, say example in Bali, how they celebrate the different rituals and cultures are actually kind of working on this intergenerational trauma. And
Mm.
it's fascinating when you start connecting all these things together, and you try and look at whether you're talking about somatic techniques being used for wellness, or you talk about meditation or hypnosis or anything, batch flowers. It's interesting how it's connected to your emotions. So that's when his work really fascinated me, and just the
Mm.
fact, when he talks about um, the child when in the womb gets affected by the mother's emotions. That's such a significant thing for us, not
Yes.
only as educators but as policymakers in the government, for them to notice it, and for them to feel, and to understand what happens when traumas move from generation to generation. So that work has fascinated me, and I think that's the reason I was talking to my daughter that as a doctor in particular, you need to be aware of these things, because you're not just treating patients, you're healing them.
Mm.
So just being aware to start with. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think our own personal practice is affected. But
Mm.
it's important for us to at least recognize and see that yes, this is something that's affecting us. That this is something that's affecting our health. So yeah, so I continue to either listen to his wisdom of trauma. Of course, it's such an eye opener, and
Yeah.
the vulnerability with which he speaks and that authenticity. I think that is something that that connected me to his work instantly. So yeah, that is where I am.
Mm. And do you have any other medics in the family?
No, I don't.
Just
Nithima is our
because
first.
I'm interested in how, your view on wellness and health is potentially confrontational to the way that your daughter is being taught in the medical system. I mean, Gabor Mate very much talks about, the separation between mind and body, and we treat people as whole people, whereas the medical education is more focused on the physical, and doesn't, and we also compartmentalize and specialize in various organs, etc., which deconstructs the patient even more, or the person
Yeah.
even more. So I can imagine that some of the things you might be trying to inculcate have been challenged by her education, which is not her fault. It's just the way that the teaching is, and how confronting can that be? But I suppose as parents, um, we know that we've got to let our children go into the world and discover things for themselves, and maybe they'll come back to realize some of the things you were saying many years were maybe very relevant. So how's that been? I mean, she must have come back and talked to you about the kind of education that she's had, and you being an educator, you must have had some views on that.
Definitely, and I think I'm actually quite grateful that she and I we share a lovely rapport, and this was something that we tried and inculcated as parents to keep ourselves open minded and not saying no to anything, but just, yeah, I don't understand this, I don't agree with this, but okay, I've heard you, and I think
Mm.
we start from there. But yes, there have been times, where she would come back and say, I'm not sure about this, not very convinced, or nah,
Yeah.
this is not what textbooks say, or she'll send me a photograph of a paragraph from the textbook to say, perhaps this. But I think one of the things that I have enjoyed with Nitima is that she has experimented with that as well. So when she was back in grade 12 and in the IB, and she was looking forward to her research topic of an extended essay, um, she actually looked at turmeric and ginger and their antibacterial properties. Because anytime she would have a cold, I would go back to my cultural roots and say, no, okay, here, this is where you how you'll get well. So When she was
Yes.
doing that, there was the synthesis of scientific processes, as well as the old traditional systems. And I think that is what we need to do more of. Uh,
Mm,
even the idea of, when you talk about yoga, and initially, and that was my understanding as well. I equated yoga purely to physical and breathing exercises, but yoga is a whole way of life. And the more I
mm,
get into yoga therapy, so I'm currently doing my yoga therapy course, which I think I'll have to continue for my life. Because it's so it's so intense when you read the Yoga Sutras. Each sutra, which is just two lines, their commentaries are massive. But you
mm,
realize that there was such an element of truth to it, that if
mm,
you want to be physically well, you can't compartmentalize. You can't treat one part of the body, because that's not how body functions. It functions as a system, and that's not how individuals function either. So Nithima and I've had we have long conversations on this, and so instead of actually trying to impose our worldviews on each other, what we have, I think we've come to this beautiful balance where we're going to listen to each other, keep our minds open, and see if there is any truth in it. And if
mm.
yes, then that is where we go. But I think being open-minded is such an essential component of it, and definitely, Dr. Roy, it really helps uh, when you talk to her about some of those books. I think there was this aha moment that my mom said the same thing. So, so she came back very excited, actually, and because to her you represent uh, that knowledge, that wisdom, that understanding, and that experience of how to work with patients. And I think that was important for her to see. So for me, living rather than talking about it has been one way of uh, trying to tell her what I'm seeing from my experience and from my learnings.
Mm. Look, I think we all have blind spots to what our parents have told us over the years, and then we come back and
Absolutely.
realize that there's wisdom there, and we need to go back and, at the moment, my mother is just thinking about her trip from the Caribbean to the UK, and she's only just sent through to me the dates that she left the St. Lucia and sailed on the boat to Southampton. And we were trying to work out how long that took, and it was roughly about 3 weeks. And she was telling me that the trip and sort of the experience and being injected with antiemetics to deal with the seasickness. And I kind of said to her, in generations that go forward, kids will just think that you flew across from the Caribbean to the UK. They won't realize. They don't. People don't realize the phone used to be plugged into the wall, and there was one phone, and that's where you had to go and talk. So there's lots of things, and there's lots of wisdom that we often um, don't listen to our parents. And I think with Neetima, we also had a patient or a consultation where the patient realized that what I was saying was what his wife had been saying or his partner had been saying for many, many years beforehand. So it was another recollection of, well, we don't listen enough, really. But it sounds like, that's a, a very healthy and beautiful way that you two are connecting in terms of having those discussions. And that's kind of down to your teaching and raising her, but also her ability, like you say, to be very agile with the different experiences that she's had and open to hearing different views. And certainly, when we talk about educating doctors or educating health professionals, I kind of am a great believer of physician heal thyself. So you have to look within first and sort of understand your own background and your own biases to then try and recognize where you need to adjust and where you need to be open and hear a little bit more about the person and where they've come from and their potential traumas or intergenerational traumas that actually affect their behavior and how you can best support them. So I can only imagine that she'll be scaling the heights of fame in terms of her career going forward with the kind of background that she's got.
Thank
Um,
you.
in terms of the future or the message that you might want to leave people with, We talked about a number of things. We talked about obviously a bit of your upbringing and a bit of the move to Singapore, and how you've done some of the things to actually give back to the community as well as professionally. What's the one message you think you might want to leave people with, or something that obviously you're working on the yoga practice as well at the moment, which is another thing you said, that continually learning. Is there something that you'd like to leave people with in terms of your view that we need to sort of be thinking about going in the future?
I think my biggest message would be that we need to start from wellness within. If we are to talk about our families, our organizations, our communities at large, uh, they can be well and successful only when we are well. So recognizing, being aware of what wellness constitutes for us, and also what success means to us, and redefining and broadening that understanding of success is essential if we are to grow for ourselves as well as for the entire community and the world at large. So wellness within is really essential. That would be my message.
Well, it's a great message to leave everyone with. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom during this conversation. And I think that it's so admirable, the work that you're doing, not only professionally, but also with the communities that you're serving. So I look forward to meeting you at some point. But it's been great to chat with you today, and I'll have to thank Nitima for putting us together to talk today.
Likewise, Dr. Leroy. Thank you.
Pleasure. Take care.